Hello and welcome to this gameplay episode. It's week 25 and it's just occurred to me that I forgot to do it's week 24 of FC24. So we'll have to wait until this time next year to do that one. Right, we have a familiar panel of guests on this gameplay pod and we can start, as we pretty much always do, with foot legend AirJapes. Hello.
Hello, Ben. Happy to be on, talking gameplay, coming off now 4 rank 1s in a row, so feeling pretty spicy.
Yeah, very, very impressive. And a man who seemingly so far has not been able to put an end to that, it's top NA player 𝗏𝗏bear. Hello.
Hello. I was told last week my hello was a little less enthusiastic, so I'm trying to be extra chipper. I am excited though. I think it was just earlier than usual recording for me. You know, it's for us NA guys, it's a early morning recording somewhat. So, but excited to be here talking gameplay.
Yeah, I mean, we do record the content pod before the gameplay pod, so that explains it. Anyway, we can move on to our final guest, who is, as you'd expect, 𝗏𝗏𝗀𝘀𝘁. Hello, welcome back.
Yes, thank you. The now precision shooting using 𝗏𝗏𝗀𝘀𝘁. And
Wow.
I'm having a lot of fun with it.
Welcome.
A lot of fun with it.
So why don't we just talk about that now? Why not? What has been the process? I mean, I know you tried it earlier in the cycle, but have there been things that you've done to make the transition easier? Did you just throw yourself in at the deep end? What was the approach?
I think it's fair to say that I come from a place of somebody who enjoys like manual controls. I've played 𝘃𝑒𝑠 for so long on full manual controls, so like actually aiming at the goal is something fairly normal to me. I also do an abnormal amount of power shots, which are manual anyway, so I didn't necessarily struggle with getting the ball on target. I think the biggest reason I stopped using it initially, and this sounds bad, but it was because of the Finesse Shot Plus being so powerful, and I found it more difficult to aim from distance and from those angles on precision. With that kind of not there as much, and also with a bit more space and time to kind of work it out, I've now got those finesse shots from distance and Travellas, which work unusually well on precision shooting from distance. But I think in general, it's just been more kind of my approach to the game has changed from when I first was trying it in that first month, when it feels like every champs win is important because everything's a bit more valuable and it'll set you up on the right path and all that kind of stuff. Whereas now I'm a little bit more chilled out. Using it in the cup has been fun because it doesn't really matter if I lose or not. I'm just getting my 3 games played a day and maybe play a little bit more than that after as well. And I think the thing that I've noticed the most is when I've been using like the Evo to Glory players, so players with very, very low shooting, is how good precision shooting is, even with players that haven't got great shooting stats. And when you combine it with green timing, which I've definitely got better at this year, it's allowing me to score from angles and score shots that I'd never have considered taking on before. And it just adds a little bit of more satisfaction, I think, when the ball goes in the back of the net, because I feel like you've done more to deserve it, kind of thing.
Yeah. And actually, Japes, do you have any particular tips for people who may try this out for the first time?
Stop putting it all the way over. Like, you have to think about, you're going to just accept that you're going to have to think about every shot you take for a hot minute.
Yep. You can't sort of wheel away in celebration as you shoot in the same way.
I'd say the biggest thing for me when I was starting to learn it again was try and aim straight at the goal, directly in the middle of the goal, because the chances are you're not going to be accurate enough to pull that off. And so it's going to go either side and will probably produce a good shot. And then as you get better, you learn to start just pushing it a little bit further into the corners.
Yeah, that makes sense. Hugh, have you tried precision shooting at all this cycle?
I have a bit. I briefly created a secondary account where I was, running that, just kind of starting from the bottom, working up with that. I ended up switching off that account for a while. So I used it a bit. I think part of the problem for me is a lot of times I'm working on generating really high quality chances where it's pretty minimal benefit from precision shooting. If anything, it might be worse because I might generate a good chance and just miss. So I'm not currently using it, but it is something I'd like to try to work into my game since I've gotten pretty good at green timing almost every shot now.
Because that's an interesting thing. It seems like green timing is pretty similar to a precision shot. So obviously if you can do both, that is going to be a really, really good shot. But do you actually feel like there are that many opportunities you have where you need an increase in shooting ability? Is that kind of what you're saying? There aren't really that many scenarios where you're like, I would have scored this.
Yeah, not as many. I've really trained myself to only shoot from areas where I'm very confident I can score from. And then I am really good with like getting the right amount of power and aim and then green timing them. So I feel like if it's going to go in, then it will. And the more manual aim is just kind of more likely to hurt me, because sometimes I'm in situations where it's really fast, quick passes, and then suddenly I'm shooting and I don't know that I have like enough time to properly line up the aim.
It's not second nature for you yet.
Yeah.
Like you're still in the I have to think about it every shot phase. Like now it's become just sort of second nature for me, and there's no going back, because I have more possible ways that I can feel good about scoring, I guess.
How do you feel 𝗬𝘗's players' stats affect precision shooting? Is it any different to shooting normally?
No, I'd say it's pretty standard. Like good shooters are good shooters.
Because it still obviously does take into account the accuracy of the shot from the player's stats perspective. It's not like you can make bad shooting players good, if you like.
I just feel like you have a little bit more control. People love power shot, right? Like when you're transitioning, just imagine that everything you're taking is kind of a power shot, and think about how you'd have to aim that.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I'm keen to try it more. Obviously, I've had 𝘵𝘂 for a long time and have taken a lot of power shots in my time now, so I'm pretty consistent at aiming it, so I feel like I might as well switch across.
The aiming is easier than power shot for what it's worth.
Is that because the timing is sort of more immediate?
Well, no, it's just like more assisted.
Oh yeah,
it's not full manual, is it?
Yeah. We should move on though to, I think Hugh, you had a question which you asked previously, and we were going to talk about, and seeing as you're here, maybe it is worth you bring it up, but it was about the technical dribble, right?
Yeah, I was just curious, how often and when you guys use that, because for me personally, even with best, I just never really use it. Just like, it's good when you're running like kind of in a straight line, but then I feel like as soon as I have to turn more than like a slight angle, they slow down so much. So I don't like, should you be throttling it a bit more, or are you just fully holding it the whole time while you dribble? I'm curious, how you get the best out of that, because I keep hearing people say I get shredded by technical dribbling and all that, and it feels horrible to me.
I use it probably more than I should do, and there are definitely times where it doesn't feel as good. The times it doesn't feel as good is like the very quick changes of direction, in terms of like, if you're wanting to turn 180 degrees, I don't think technical dribbling is the best way to achieve that. But if you're wanting to get that kind of like 30-degree change of direction that would just take you outside the realm of a tackler's like tackle box, that's where I use it the most. So like to get it into the midfield and then kind of maneuver it through a midfield. A lot of the time people will kind of run at you with a midfielder because they don't feel like they're pulling them out of position. And a technical dribble can just accelerate you away from their tackle box without losing control of the ball to the point where a defender can then just step in and win it. That tends to be where I use it the most. And then again, as long as I'm moving forward, I just use it as a bit of a pace changer in terms of like dribbling with the ball to kind of like just burst into a little bit of space in the box, like especially when you've cut back on the corner of the box. If there's no kind of covering winger usually that's dropping back with it, you can just use it to burst into that space in the box and then release it. I definitely think I'm not great at knowing when to release it, and there feels like there's a little period of time between releasing it and getting like proper just left stick dribble control of the ball again. But for that kind of exploiting spaces but still maintaining more control of the ball, especially in midfield, like to get between the lines, that tends to be where I use it more rather than necessarily in and around the box all that much.
Yeah, I think my favorite spot is to force the issue, I suppose I'd say, between like transitioning between the lines. Like you're able to turn a player, and 𝗏𝑆 is absolutely like second to none at his ability to quickly just like turn a player. And as soon as you're able to do that and you're sort of like by them, the technical dribble allows you to very easily still pick a pass going forward, but like keep it close enough that you can cause problems. And it's just phenomenal.
Yeah, where I use it the most is probably to almost, I would call it, kind of solidify the fact I'm beating a player. So if you've created a little bit of space and you need to push past that player, but are kind of concerned that maybe they'll bring in another player to put sudden pressure on you, if you use the controlled sprint in that situation, you can keep very close control of the ball while exiting that player that you've just beaten's field of influence, if you like. I think that's a really effective way to use it. The other thing, though, I've been using it more and more in combination with 𝗏𝐵 to use them almost like a kind of gas or accelerator and brake combination. You can do these really elaborate runs if you use that in combination. You sort of go forward with a controlled sprint and then pull it to the side slightly with 𝗏𝐵 and then continue with controlled sprint. And you were talking, Josh, about the way that it can sometimes feel like you don't have very good control of the player as you come out of the controlled sprint. I think that does negate it somewhat if you do that. And especially with 𝘏𝑆℔ coming in from midfield, I guess, if you go between the centre backs and fullbacks quite often, you can sort of start to drive with controlled sprint, then pull it away from them a bit with 𝗏𝐵, and then push further around to get into a cutback situation. There's quite a few options once you've got to grips with it, but it does take a bit of time to do that. And I also think it helps a lot if that player has technical plus, just because, you know, they're just faster and more controlled with the controlled sprint. For those who don't know, I don't know whether we've said this, but yes, you need to hold R1 or RB to initiate it. It's called controlled sprint, but it is enhanced by the technical playstyle and playstyle plus. Is there anything else you wanted to ask you?
No, that makes sense. It sounds, I think what Josh said definitely makes sense. It's kind of more of a ghosting by people as they kind of come towards you, rather than, I think I was maybe more using it in situations where I should have either been just jogging or actually sprinting. And I was like, I thought it was kind of like an in-between, but it's like, if you're already past someone, then they're just going to catch up to you. So I was maybe like using it in the wrong situation. So I'll definitely give it another go. I think the way I dribble is very left stick dependent, a lot of wiggling back and forth. So I'm kind of turning side to side, waiting for you to dive in and miss, and then I just go the other way and then sprint off, rather than continuously running at you. And then when you dive in, just go right around. It's like a stop, turn, beat you, then go again. So just kind of similar to the precision shooting, that I just kind of need to think about how it fits in with my game and maybe consider taking a step back and like risking losing a few more games to work it in.
The other place that I like to use it is if you get the ball with best back to goal, like right at the top of the 18, you can start to turn with left stick and then hit the technical and start driving to the byline. And when their center back comes in to try to take it away, you can take a quick touch further outside and they either foul you or you blow by them.
Yeah.
And it gives you, then they're like, you've beaten their back line. And whether they try to move their keeper and you go near post or they don't, you are going to have a cutback opportunity because their center back is now missed a tackle and is still standing at the top of the 18.
Yeah, I'd also say if you can shot cancel during controlled sprinting, it's kind of nasty. Like, people get really done by that. They're already kind of slightly panicking because you're controlled sprinting, and yeah, they'll throw in a tackle or block, and you can go beyond them. It works really well. I think that's enough on that for now. If people have any questions on technical or controlled sprint, then do get in touch, and we'll come back after the break, where Josh is going to give us his corner technique, which is allowing him to score 90% of his corners, apparently. We'll be back just after this. Hello, welcome back to part 2 of this week's gameplay episode. And as promised, Josh, you're going to tell us a bit about this corner technique, which is apparently very effective.
Yeah, and I can't take like personal credit for this. This is absolutely the Corner King's work here. For anybody who's watched any of the #house, Harry Hesketh just seems to only score corners. And so it was from watching him and seeing how he was doing it, I decided to try and replicate it. And whether this is exactly what he's doing or not, it doesn't really matter. It works incredibly well. But essentially, you need a player that's got at least dead ball as a base play style. If you get it as a playstyle plus, it's even more effective, but as long as they've just got the normal one. And essentially what you want to put in is a flat, incredibly fast corner. If a player brings their keeper out and just into the middle, you can win the header at the front post. So you do need to switch in. I think it's L1. It's kind of second nature. I think it's L1 to switch receiver, whichever one it is to switch receiver for you, and switch to your best header of the ball, whether that be like Haaland, if you've got Haaland. Van Dijk's very good for it, but anybody who's big, if they've got aerial, that's even better. And then you want to kind of push slightly up in terms of where you're hitting the ball, so you get a flatter trajectory. You want to aim fairly close to the goal if you're swinging it out, or fairly like inside the penalty spot if you're swinging it in. And then it's about 3.5 bars of power. So very, very like hard, like low trajectory corner. It's got to be just high enough to beat the head of the front post defender, which isn't too difficult you'll eventually find that. And then you just move your player, whether it be Van Dijk or Haaland or whoever your big header of the ball is, into the front post area. And it's like you win the header. You win the header pretty much every single time. There's a few times maybe if they've moved somebody to defend it that they might get a block in, but most of the time you'll win the header. And as long as you get the direction right, it's going in the back of the net because they've moved the keeper out. If the keeper's not moved out, it still works because they can't adjust to the change in angle of the cross that quickly. If they move the keeper out and bring them front post, you can do the same, slightly higher trajectory, bit closer to the goal, but just do the same at the back post. And it's like that's almost an easier goal than the one at the front post, because the one at the front post can be a little bit more contested. But essentially just practice getting low trajectory, high powered corners and using the switch receiver to bring a player to kind of in line with the front post is about where you want to be heading the ball. It's more of like a flick on goal than a like powered headed down. And yeah, I've never scored as many corners. There are games where I can't break somebody down. I actively play for corners.
Damn, that sounds great. And in terms of the header technique, are you low powering it so it heads it down, or just?
Yeah, I tend to always low power headers from corners anyway. But because you have so much power on the cross coming in, you don't need to add any more with the head itself.
Can you upload a picture or an image of what the aiming like reticle or whatever it's called looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe just tweet it out. For those who don't know, Josh's Twitter can be found JoshXLS_, right, Josh? I think.
Yes, that's the one.
Perfect. Right, let us move on to actually any other tips people might have. I'm sure, Hugh, you've got some tips up your sleeve. I mean, they might be pro clubs ones though. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll say that press proven is definitely a play style that I think people don't really put enough weight on. I know we talked about it a bit on the content podcast with Smolarek. That Team of the Year Salah has it. I've tried it in clubs with a 6'7" striker with like 60 agility maybe, but press proven plus just makes such agile dribbling. It only works though when you're kind of like walking or jogging, so not sprinting or controlled sprinting or anything like that. You have to be no inputs other than the left stick, but you can turn so much faster. It's also good for shielding the ball. So when you think about a big man, really useful. I think the only like sort of target man that you would consider like in that role that has it is that triple threat Kluivert, I think.
Press proven
otherwise,
plus.
Yeah.
Or just right.
Otherwise, yeah. Some others have like the regular version, which is definitely helpful, but not too common.
Big D-Day has got 5-star weak foot, base press proven, and first touch.
Yeah, it's very underrated. I think people kind of didn't really get, like when you think press proven, you think like, oh, if you're under pressure, you'll make good passes or something like that. But it's very useful for dribbling and shielding with players of any size. But I think it's especially useful on players with not great agility, that it really kind of helps to compensate for that. So I would look out for it, especially as we start to get maybe an Evo that gives it to a certain player, or just lots more cards coming out with double play styles. That I think it's definitely worth considering as something that's useful. It's not something that's just kind of okay.
Yeah,
it's one of my favorite play styles, like by far. I don't find small players need it as much, but when I've definitely done previous evolutions because I was like, ooh, it's a press proven one. Like I should find a big player just to get it on them. You know what I mean? In case I like want to do it later on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and people who used that winter wild card, 𝗬𝘪𝘬𝘦 SBC, he has the plus, so that's probably a big reason that he feels a bit better on the ball. That his agility, I think, isn't amazing, and he's pretty tall, so definitely one you could look out for. That new hero Yaya Toure has it. I bet he's crazy good on the ball.
Yeah, he does look really good. Let us move on, unless anyone else has a final thing to drop in before we do move on.
I think I reached peak rat this week. I spoke previously about learning the Stepover speed boost and how effective that had become. I've since learned how to cancel Stepovers, and oh my goodness, it makes them even more broken. Like the speed boost you get out of it, how quickly you can turn. But yeah, if you like trigger a Stepover and then just smack both triggers in, you can send people absolutely flying with it.
Does it look kind of broken? Because I can't recall it actually. I know I've had it done to me a few times, but yeah, it kind of makes the player sort of stutter.
It looks glitchy, yeah.
Yeah, I don't mind shooting cancel so much just because they feel like dummies, but cancelling skill moves, especially when the exit is unnatural, feels a bit weird. Anyway, we'll take an earlier second break than usual to leave plenty of time for, I guess, a bit of a deeper question about 𝗪𝐶24 and the football simulator as a whole. We'll be back in just a moment. Hello, listeners. A quick reminder that this podcast is made possible through the generosity of supporters out there. And actually, they aren't just doing it out of the kindness of their heart, because you get a whole extra podcast every single week as a supporter. And you can sign up for a 7-day free trial right now over on Patreon. And after that, it's just £3 a month to continue supporting. It makes a huge difference. The podcast for a time wasn't able to be weekly because I had other work commitments, but this has made it possible to deliver a podcast every single week, and in fact, an extra one too, just for supporters, as I mentioned. So if that interests you and you want that extra content, and actually if you would like even more, there's the supporter Discord at the gold tier. There is the Hall of Fame at the end of the podcast in the icon tier. There are loads of perks available. So why not check it out if you haven't done so already by searching Support for Weekly or following the link in the description of this podcast. If you consider doing so, that would be hugely appreciated. And a big thank you to all those supporters, as I said, keeping the podcast going and keeping Foot Weekly weekly. Right, let's get back into the pod. Hello, welcome back after the break. So, Cordless Hawk asked this question. He says, questions for the pod. I've been meaning to send this in for a while. The podcast with AJ3 after Christmas, he was saying he was trying to get better at the game. It was an amazing episode. My question is, how do you suggest we get better, and what 5 things would you do? I think a good portion of the pod listeners are like me, not close to 𝗪𝘀's or even Ben's level. Thank you. But how do we get there? It was interesting. Andy said he was becoming a student of the game. How would we do this? For example, is it watching a pro, and who would you watch? He's saying he was an 11 to 14 win Division 3 player last cycle, and this year I've not been able to qualify for champs all year. 3 wins is my best, and he's in Division 6, although divisions have been a bit different this year anyway, and he's having a horrid time with the game. I've been able to assemble a really, really good Road to Glory squad, he says, overpowered players everywhere, but I can't seem to get better in any way. How does someone like me, other than give up, get better? And what do you recommend? Any formations, instructions, players, connection? Where do you even start? I would just say quickly, connection is a big factor. And if your connection has changed, got worse, maybe over last summer before you started the new game, obviously that's going to have a big impact. But I thought we could cover this, maybe talk about it at more length on the next episode in terms of gameplay specifics. But an interesting thing came up because this is the time of year where people get very familiar with the game, start to see all the flaws, and that obviously leads people to criticize the game as much as look at their own gameplay and think about how to improve. And actually, it can be tricky to know where you should be critical of your own shortcomings, I suppose, at the game, and where you need to think, well, actually, there wasn't really anything I could do in that situation. And I suppose I thought it'd be interesting to have a conversation about how we talk about those kinds of things on the podcast, because I think often questions might get asked about concerns with gameplay, and we'll often say, this is an issue and it's frustrating, but actually you can do things to overcome those issues. And interestingly, Josh, you had 2 really good examples where these lines can and can't be drawn. Do you want to give us one of those examples? I know we're doing it in audio form, but again, maybe people can find these on Twitter or something.
Yeah, so we were just kind of chatting pre-pod, and I'd had a situation in a squad battles games because I'm a squad battles king, and I'd got Team of the Year honorable mention 𝘵𝗵𝗀𝘰 and performed what I thought would have been a very good tackle as a kind of player, tried to, run fairly straight at me, but then in on one-on-one it would have been. This is about 30 yards out. And I pressed the tackle button and 𝘵𝗵𝗀𝗰's feet kind of locked in place and he like swanton bombed the attacker coming through and just like threw his upper body at him. And 𝘵𝗵𝗀𝗰 got a red card, and I kind of went and watched it back, and I was like, his feet just stopped moving. He didn't like try and put a leg out at all. And I feel like that happens to me every now and then, and it's incredibly frustrating when it happens. And so, I was moaning about it pre-pod, and, Japes then asked me what my settings were on my controller. I kind of had a different perspective on it.
I think it stems from, and I hold this belief kind of personally to be true as I've, I suppose, like matured and played this game for, well over a decade now. It's like like we can all agree on the fact that like the game is imperfect. However, there are controls in the game for like the instance Josh is talking about. Advanced defending gives you the ability to choose whether you body check or whether you stick a foot out. And so in instances like, Josh, what you're talking about, I kind of don't feel bad for you.
How dare you?
Yeah. I just feel like you go learn advanced defending. If you want to have more control over how the game plays, you can choose some of the more or less AI driven options. And like the advanced defending is one that I think is very reasonable for everyone to turn on. Like if anybody's ever played defensively in real life, there are times when you want to body check someone and you want to stick your foot out and tackle the ball. And I am going to select my ability to choose when that time is right over the game's ability to select it 100% of the time. Because I think there's like a lot of factors that go into play when you like don't have that on in your 𝘵𝗵𝗀𝗰 instance. It's like, how far away was the ball from the attacking player when you press the button? What are some of his stats that are involved? And it's like, I just would rather remove that risk entirely and just be able to choose to stick my foot out 100% of the time.
Yeah, and I when you said that, I obviously had a little bit of pushback, and I because nobody tells me I'm bad at this game other than me
and the misses,
and the misses, yeah. But I think like, if you listen to that and go, well, no, 𝘵𝗵𝗀𝗰𝗀 should have made the tackle, I am in agreement with you, but I also agree with Japes that, in my opinion, the game should have known in that situation, if he just sticks a foot out, he can make the tackle. What Japes is saying is, with adding a bit of extra skill to my game, I can remove the reliance on a game engine that I don't think is very clever in order to execute the thing I know I want to execute anyway. And I think it's that mindset change of like play the course you're on rather than the one you want to be playing. Like, yeah, it would be lovely if the game like was in tune with your brain and knew exactly what you wanted to do, but it's not. And so if you have the power to fix something, then you can choose to fix it. And I think the second example that happened pre-pod, it wasn't actually my gameplay, but I was watching back some of 𝘵𝗫𝗀𝗃's gameplay, and the player had broken through. So he sprinted out with his right centre back, bad mistake in the first place, and it got played around him to the attacker, who's then kind of attacking the hole in the defence. 𝘵𝗫 is controlling the left centre back and wants to switch into the right back because they're the two players that the attacker's moving between. But as he goes to hit the switch player, it selects the left back because for like 3 frames, the second man reticle switches to the left back, who is like 50 yards from the play and can have no impact whatsoever. And I think that is like a logic error in the game. Now, he could have right stick switched, and I'm a big proponent of right stick switching, but, and this is again that thing of, I do want to criticize the game there, because there is no setting you should have on that if you hit right bumper, it selects a player that was maybe the 5th closest player to the ball. No setting should do that. You should only be able to do that with right stick switching. So I think that's kind of where there are two things. There are things that you can fix. There are things that are genuine skill issues. And then there are problems with the game that you just have to work around. And I think we take that mentality of working around those problems and looking at yourself, because that's the thing you can change.
Yeah, the game is the game. Like, this cycle, it's not going to dramatically change. So if you like playing a good football or soccer simulation, this is what it is. And I would say that the other point to that is like, well, in that situation, like, Nep, let's work on right stick switching, right? And how we defend, because that's something that can be in your control, that will elevate your skills in terms of how you play the game. But like, offensively, we're very happy to abuse mechanics often, right? And defensively, I feel like some of the mentality needs to be like, how do we minimize flawed mechanics? And that approach just seems to not, like, I don't know, like, there's a big part of me that's like, I don't understand what people are like hoping to achieve, right? Like, in that, depending on how closely players mark, you're like, well, the defender should be, like, oftentimes I see people that are like, the defender should have been marking that attacker. And it's like, well, what are the attackers and defenders like skill ratings? Like, because if those have no impact, then all the players are going to play the same in the situation. And then it all comes down to pace. And that's it. So if we don't want a game that's purely based around pace, like, there has to be nuance. There has to be. And I like deeply feel like people's enjoyment of this game will improve dramatically if we take the approach of the game is what it is, and flawed and all, and I'm going to do the best I can to minimize those flaws and improve myself. It's like watching, like, you go out, you watch a bottom of the, like, say you support a bottom of the table Premier League squad. You like accept them for their flaws and still want to see them do well and try to do well. The approach is like taking a sport like football or soccer with all of the potential randomness, with 11 players, with different movements, different attacking and defensive and striking, and all of these things, and elements of randomness that just kind of happen because it's about a round ball, and saying, we're going to make a game that allows every single player to make a 100% perfect pass every time, doesn't make sense to me. It's just like, for me personally, it's like becoming a pet peeve. It just, logically, it would not make sense to me. It would not be a fun game. It'd be insanely repetitive and we'd all burn out after a couple months.
Yeah. And I would say one of the things from a sort of podcast perspective that I think we've always, I like to think, done a good job on is giving people things that they can take away and improve their game regardless of the issues with gameplay. And we'll talk about the issues with gameplay. It's just that what we feel is useful for listeners is the stuff that they can take away and try and work on. And actually, it reminds me of, I'm sure people are aware of various football podcasts that at one point just decided we need to stop talking about VAR, because otherwise the whole podcast becomes a conversation about VAR. I mean, it's not so much anymore, but previously it was. And it's that kind of thing where actually, is that what listeners want? Generally, I've found not particularly. And if we are going to talk about it, we tend to talk about it a bit later in the cycle. So that's kind of the podcast approach, I guess, to this. And that being said, Hugh, I know you're someone who actually is happy to have a little rant. Sometimes, even in the Discord.
Only sometimes.
Yeah. But do you think it actually sometimes can help people, to vent about these things? I guess it can a bit, right?
You have to keep in mind, like, there's a distinction between saying the game is bad, or I don't like this about the game, or this is broken, and saying it's not my fault. Because I think there's plenty of times you can recognize that you've been on the bad end of RNG or a bug or something, but you still could have done more to fix it. But I think sometimes what people struggle with is that, it's a game where you can't be perfect. So you can always improve. So it's like, it's never completely not your fault unless it's like a total like game breaking glitch where like you can't see your players, something dumb like that. But, when it comes to improvement, you can always improve, and the better player doesn't always win. And that's true in real life too. If Man City and Burnley
Manchester
played 100
United.
times, Manchester. Pick the best team in whichever league and the worst team in whichever league. The best team isn't going to win 10 times out of 10 or 100 times out of 100. And to some extent, if you think, oh, well, I'm the better player, so I should win, well, then doesn't that make the game even more like pay to win? Because it just means that if you get the best team, and you're good at the game, then you'll basically never lose. But that's why Weekend League is fun, because you can face someone who might have a better team or be a better player. But if things go your way and you play, your best, then you have a chance.
Let's take shooting, for example, right? I sort of feel like if you're asking for everything to be perfect, you're also saying, well, I intended the shot to go top corner and it didn't go top corner, so the game's broken. And I'm kind of like, that just feels crazy to me. And maybe that's not exactly how people are asking for it, but I sort of feel like it's not dissimilar logic.
It's the coding logic that replicates 11 players with brains of their own, whereas Foot is one person controlling everyone. Like if Pep got to individually control all of his players at all times, they'd probably never lose, because he knows the plan. He can tell them exactly what to do. There's no option for thinking for yourself. But in a way, the game has to replicate that in some way, or else it's just robotic, like it's doing exactly what you tell it to do every single time with no chance of alternate outcomes. But I think it definitely can be frustrating when those outcomes go against you more than they go against your opponent in a given game, especially if you feel like you're the better player. But to some extent, we kind of have to live with that, because the alternative is just boring, even though it might be less frustrating. It's just not as fun. It's, if you play a shooter game, sometimes you have the best gun, you take the best angle, you get the best, drop on the opponent, and then your shots just miss and they turn around and they get you. Like it's part of basically every online game. There's just so many factors that go into it. It can't be perfect.
I also think there's an element of like I've seen a lot of complaints about pack luck and pack weight. And I think, to be honest, people don't want everybody to have better pack weight. They just want them to have better pack weight. And it's very similar in terms of like shooting and passes. Like, yeah, you may want all of your passes to go in the right direction, but I promise you, all of your opponent's passes aren't going in the right direction, and all of their shots aren't going where they intended. So the game becomes very different for both players. It's not just, very often we can feel like the game is playing against you, and that's the way you look at it. It's you versus the game and your opponent, whereas actually you're both playing the same game, and it's about exploiting the parts of that game that, or avoiding the parts of that game that can often lead to your like downfall within a match. So I think it's worth saying that, with the both of the examples I've said here, I think they are issues in the game, and I think there's a logical thing there in however it's coded that is wrong. But in both of those situations, there is a way to avoid it happening by improving your own skill. And, that's not to say that every situation is like that, but, there is, the more accountability you can take, the better you'll become. And if you don't want to become a better player and just want to hear that it's the game's fault, that's absolutely fine. But I don't think you'll improve at the game by wanting or hearing that all of the time. It's you need the opposite of like Goodwill Hunting. It is your fault. It is your fault. So, and if you take that approach, however frustrating it can be at times, you will get better.
Yeah. And I think that's the tricky balance there, is that, like I was saying with like, you're never perfect, is that sometimes it's just exhausting to feel like you've worked and improved and it's still not good enough. That like sometimes you want to feel like I grinded, I got better at the game, and now I'm going to win. And then you don't. Because the matchmaking is random, the connection can be random, the quality of teams you're facing can be random. So if you feel like you're in a rut where it's just like, I've worked so hard to improve, but I'm not winning, one, you might still have improved and you just faced a bad run. You messed up a few details and things didn't go your way. Or two, maybe just take a break, just play a different game for a bit, reset your mentality. Just when it's good to vent, I think it's good to get it out and, feel like, all right, got that off, I can reset. But sometimes you can't let the venting edge you on to like be even more mad. So that like, I'm complaining about how bad the game is, and now I'm going to go straight into another game. And when something goes wrong, I'm immediately going to be at level 10 anger because I was just talking about how bad the game is and now it happened again.
Yeah.
And I think as well, there is a mentality thing in terms of like, if you only see winning as fun, if the only part of the game that's fun for you is winning, there needs to be an acceptance that the maximum number of people that can ever be happy then is 50%. Because only 50% of people can win a game. And if there's draws, like in Rivals, that's even lower. And so, if you feel mad 50% of the time because you lost, that's kind of like what it should be. And, if you're in the right Rivals division, then, you're going to win, draw, and lose pretty much in equal measure because that's the way the system's supposed to work. And whether that's good or not is slightly different. Whether we should have that kind of skill-based matchmaking that gives you like equal matchups in pretty much every game, that's a topic of whether we think that's the ultimate way to run this game. I don't think it is. I think it's killed a lot of games, actually, skill-based matchmaking. But it's a bit fairer for the people who aren't very good. And that's, I just want to go in there and like batter people like I used to with the Silver Squad in like FIFA 12, but that's just not the game anymore, and it probably wasn't fair on the people that I was playing against. So, there's probably a happy medium in there that we can strive towards.
And in terms of the gameplay issues people have, I think it's important to say that despite what might be a common belief that EA don't particularly care for user feedback, certainly as far as the gameplay team are concerned, that isn't my experience at all. And actually, there is a new tool that EA have added just literally this week called the Player Feedback Portal. It's in beta, and that is something that I'm sure the gameplay team will be looking closely at. So if you have issues with gameplay, whether it's balancing related, whether it's bugs, etc., you can feedback through that. The link is go.ea.com/𝗵𝗀24pf. So worth heading over there and feeding back if you have any specific things. The other thing we haven't talked about, which is a big factor, is connection. If you have a variable connection, it will mean you have just strange gameplay experiences, which other people who have stable connections aren't going to have. We did that special episode, Connection Special. Supporters can go listen to that. I think it's linked in the description of every single supporter episode, and that will break down what you can do to improve your connection, inform you about connection. EA actually have some tools that you can use, which people don't tend to use, that can be very helpful. A good example of this, actually, Hugh, is we're talking about at the end of the content pod playing pro clubs. I know you've talked about it a bit, but there is a notable difference on the different pings that you get in pro clubs because we're playing across continents, I guess, at times.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a lot of our games are with like UK or EU ping, so I'll be on 88, 100 ping, something like that. Some of our West Coast guys will be on like 150 ping, and it's basically just a constant feed of that pass didn't go where I wanted it to, or the ball just phased through me, when really that's not what actually happened. It probably did do what it was supposed to do. You're just not seeing it correctly because of the ping.
Yeah, it's that delay in actions that really does massively affect your ability to compete. And you think that you have it bad. If you have an Ethernet connection, you have it a lot better than pretty much all of your opponents, because the percentage of people who actually play on Wi-Fi is extremely high, and Wi-Fi, no matter what you might think if you've only ever played on Wi-Fi, has a huge negative impact on your gameplay experience, for sure. Just before we wrap up here, Hugh, we talked about two things that could have helped Josh. One is player switching, one is advanced defending. Any particular tips on either of those before we wrap up?
Yeah, I'd say just overall, try to keep it fairly simple. Especially if you're trying to learn new inputs or switch to advanced defending, Just try out the commands when you can. Maybe go into rivals where, if you lose a game, you can see a few goals, not as big of a deal. But it's one of those things where I think it really raises the ceiling on your game when you add more options for inputs. It's kind of like learning player lock or getting good at manual aim with power shots or headers or things like that, where for a while, if you're doing them, it's going to feel like it's bad. It's a waste of time. You're not good at them. But as you master them, you'll feel like it's really raising the game as a whole.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I would say 𝘂𝘓𝘁 question that started this conversation, he did not particularly say that the game was at fault for him not being able to improve. And obviously there are plenty of tips we can bring up which will help 𝘂𝘓𝘁 in the future, I'm sure. And we'll come back to this question to cover it from a more strictly gameplay advice perspective in the near future. For now, though, we'll say our goodbyes to our guests here. So, Hugh, nice of you to join us for 2 podcasts this week. Thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, happy to join. If anyone has any questions, especially, gameplay related, or you just want a rant or something like that, definitely join the Discord. Lots of us in there that, have similar feelings or have been through similar things, can give you advice on, how to improve on those things, or even just hear you out if you want to say that the game sucks before you load immediately back into another Champs game. So, we've all been there.
Yeah. If you'd like to ignore all our advice, maybe don't join the Discord. No, you can also join the Discord if you're a gold or above supporter. And of course, an extra episode every week if you are a regular supporter of the podcast, just £3 a month. And there's a 7-day free trial as well. Let's say our goodbyes to our 2 even more regulars. It is, first of all, time to say goodbye to Josh XLs. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm just off to cry and put advanced depending on.
As you should have many, many moons ago.
I tried it and I was bad at it, so I turned it off again.
What do you know? Learning new skills is hard.
Indeed. And thank you very much as well to 𝗲𝗍𝒽s for your, honesty on this podcast.
I appreciate that, Ben. I don't mean to make what I say feel like personal to any of the listeners, but I certainly gone through a lot of iterations with this game and certainly grown and been able to continue playing at a pretty high level. And I think one of the constants is just figuring out what works for me while playing the game. So, it's about what's learning new skills and figuring out what works for you. But enjoy the pod as always.
Yeah, very true. Thank you. And of course, thank you very much to all you listeners tuning in. You can catch these podcast episodes in your podcast feeds, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts from. And you can catch them on YouTube. If you are listening on YouTube, then do leave a like, drop a comment, and thank you very much for the support over there. And if you would like to support further, then you can, of course, support the pod over on Patreon. Just search Support for Weekly. A big thank you to all those supporters, including those icon patrons: Dave B, Hugh J, Darren W, Alistair M, Dom P, Rob P, Jeff B, Damon H, Tom B, Adam G, Neil P, Alex M, Jake S, Dan W, Roger D, Lee A, Andrew C, Nishant, Waterman, Dylan H, Adam R, Rob L, Brendan W, Michael K, David G, Jimmy K, John D, Michael B, Aditya S, and Joshua K. Plus a special thanks to Luke M, Dave B, Hugh J, Tom M, Darren W, and Pato Foot for advice and production assistance. Before I leave you, just one more thing to add though. Ultimate Team is a bit like life really. It has its many ups and downs. If you're having a few more downs than ups in real life in these more difficult times, then please don't feel that you're alone or need to struggle on without taking action. If you go to thecalmzone.net, there's loads of resources, advice, support, or even just a friendly chat for anyone who needs it. If it sounds like it could help you, then head over to thecalmzone.net. And for now, have a good one, and I'll catch you on the next podcast.